I have been working on the changes in our manners of thinking and learning induced by the social network and the reels. I will focus in my talk on the new kind of relations we are facing today in the digital universe. We are connected instantaneously with the whole world, accumulating all kinds of data in a permanent acceleration which induces illimitation, lack of time for thinking, and for developing critical thinking. I will describe this situation and wonder how to try to resist to the pressure of this situation. Taking their cue from Benjamin's work, a number of writings from the 50s and 60s examined the evolution of technology and its impact on the way individual functions. In 1935, Benjamin published a strikingly profound text on the consequences of the reproduction of the work of art for individual modes of existence and their inner lives. He discerns a process that has to do with the way technological means enable and encourage immediate appropriation. Benjamin insisted that only the existence of the work of art is important, not the fact that it is seen. He observed that increased masses of interested people have generated a very different kind of interest. For the masses, the work of art would be an entertainment. For the art lover, it would be an object of contemplation, of meditation, of thought. In the version he published in 1939, Benjamin prefigures the advent of the most contemporary functions of information technology, such as Facebook and social networks, anticipating their technical, social, and political omnipotence. What conclusions can we draw from these observations? The gaze and attention would have declined in attention induced by the acceleration of images and information shown continuously. We see all the time, we no longer have time to look and think. From the mid-50s onwards, Gunther Anders extended Benjamin's observation with a series of thinking on the effects of technology on subjectivity, resulting in an inability to see, to feel, and imagine. Anders locates the reason for this in a gap, and I quote him, in a gap between the capacity to manufacture induced by modern technology and the capacity to represent the product of this manufacture. He concludes that, I am quoting him, our world, evading both our representation and our perception, is becoming more and more obscure, so obscure that we can no longer even recognize its obscurity. Individuals are now the object of a paradoxical exclusion, deprived of their very capacity to judge, discern, and think. They are nonetheless integrated into the economic functions of production and consumption that they help to develop. Anders is, in a way, one of the first to have led the foundations for work, reflecting on the threats of the human condition by speaking of the obsolescence of the human being. Contemporary technologies are bringing about upheavals, some of them familiar, some unprecedented, in the way subjectivity functions, as it experiences a continuity imposed and suffered in a screen-based society that demands continuity of self-visibility. the individual is much less confronted with the gaze and words of another, of a fellow human being, but much more with screens. In the past, individuals were seen in their physical dimension through mediation, in ways learned and transmitted by tradition and education. But now they are seen through screens, on screens. Contemporary societies encourage immediate, instantaneous, ephemeral, and constantly changing visibility, which is causing major upheavals in individuals. We need to ask ourselves whether this visibility imposed, suffered, sought, or abhorred does not deprive us of our interiority and thus of freedom. Hesitation, pauses, time, dead time, and creative imagination. What does acceleration call into question? Today, those observations are multiplied tenfold by the intensification and continuity of sensory and informational flows from omnipresent media. This relationship to time, like the relationship to space, seems to be disappearing. Unlimited and virtual, time and space end up inducing a self-centeredness inseparable from the feeling of a loss of self, of a sheltered inner space, and of an unlimited extension of sensoriality and accumulation of knowledge of all kinds. In Le futurisme de l'instant, Paul Virilio, urban planner and philosophical anthropologist, stressed in the mid-2000s that human beings have a psychic need for spatial, temporal, and sensory anchorage. He rightly insists that the importance taken on by contemporary technology call into question all shared reality, whether geographical, cultural, historical, which, I am quoting him, affects our relationship, not only subjective and interpersonal, but also, and above all, our relationship to the world. In another essay, Virilio observes that interactivity has replaced the intermediation of the employee of yesterday, and that rootedness has been overturned by interactive simultaneity, leading us to a crucial question: how can we live our relationship with others and with the whole world, instantaneously, in immediacy, without mediation? This leads him to conclude that the supreme endangerment of our everyday life, this way of life, which, if we are not careful, will tomorrow lead to a vitality rendered fundamentally uninhabitable by the excess of a life without any instruction for use. This state of limitedness and indifferentiation thus generally results in our no longer being able to know what is me, what is other. Virilio's conclusions precisely reflect the spirit of many contemporary studies. Everything that is fixed, I am quoting him, everything that is still fixed is in fact threatened. How can we persist in being? How to resist effectively the sudden derealization of a world where everything is seen and already forgotten? In order to conceive of other developments and other functions of the ego, the state of unlimitedness and indifferentiation, it seems necessary to return to Winnicott's works through the hypotheses they formulate on the way baby discovers objects separated from the self and the avenues they open up and perception of a virtual space. Thus, but unfortunately, I don't have the time to elaborate. In a world where the boundaries between the real and the virtual are becoming increasingly blurred, it is not so much the objective nature of shared reality as the construction of an inner space that seems to be lacking. This is undoubtedly a major phenomenon. Bernard Stiegler's latest book, dedicated to the effects of acceleration, examines what happens when technological devices replace ways of living, an effect of what he calls disruption, a process of acceleration that destroys protections, affiliations, belonging. Technologies insofar as they encourage the exposure of the most intimate feelings linked to each individual's singular history are intrusive. Considering that the question of identity is now crucial, Zygmunt Bauman and Raud turn to the question of the self in liquid societies. What do we gain and what do we lose in these technological modes of existence? Technologies bring us closer, annulling distance, paradoxically establishing permanent contact, and at the same time, an abysmal distance. As an extension of the ego, technologies confer a tenfold power accompanied by psychic insecurity and diffuse anxiety. We now seem to be faced with a new idea of man. There is no longer any right to be invisible, to intimacy. Invisibility is forbidden. The ongoing injunction to visibility to contemporary societies reveal the sense of existence. We now have to make ourselves seen as much as possible. And to do this, we must constantly offer images of ourselves, be present, known, even famous on the screens. Do new technologies tend to exceed people's capacity for perception, understanding, and discernment? Visibility is now at the heart of the production process, which, to a large extent, has become consumption, to such an extent that the injunction to be visible, the permanent obligation to offer and show images of oneself, in a word, the visibility of oneself, is now imposed on the individual. The individual must show himself in order to exist as much as possible. He must ultimately exist continuously in the eyes of as many people as possible. In so doing, it tends to become literally an image, repeated no doubt, but nonetheless ephemeral, a fleeting appearance. For society as a whole, and for professional institutions in particular, appearance and self-image tend to guarantee and ensure one's quality and legitimacy. In other words, the importance and notoriety of one's status. Let's ask ourselves whether we are now ready to face the forms of division of the human psyche induced by spatial unlimitedness and temporal acceleration, by the continuous nature of sensation and of information flows of images. To what extent, with what effects? Visibility has become synonymous with legitimacy, usefulness, a guarantee of an individual's quality, the frequency, quality, and even continuity of visibility would enhance its value. Invisibility would become synonymous with uselessness, insignificance, even non-existence. A number of studies have focused on the effects of the continual presence of screens of subjectivity, especially for children. They note that, I am quoting, stability used to be socially and culturally valued, and that what is now decisive and preferred to stability, considered as rigid, is flexibility, the ability to adapt and change. The part of ourselves that we sell, and I'm thinking of Marx, and are forced to sell may not have diminished. It has changed in nature and now concerns all individuals, touching on the condition of modern man, contributing to and reinforcing the discontinuity and fragmentation of the self. It responds to an injunction. It's no longer just a question of offering physical strength, but also of offering psychic person, part of the very condition of man in contemporary individualism. Now a consumer, but just as much as an object of consumerism. Consumed, the individual must constantly sell himself and be consumed, and to do such must exist on screens in contemporary technologies. He would find himself faced with a continuous incitement calling into question the capacity for choice, reflection, the psychic capacity for activity in consumption. All these works deal fundamentally with an explicit issue, rarely addressed as such: what becomes of the human condition when man is transparent, virtual, at once devoid of substance, deprived of the essential, of an element of permanence and continuity, and at the same time obliged to be entirely visible. Seeing and looking, as well as knowing how not to see, means discretion, where the subject of learning rules and principles designed to protect, to respect, and protect ourselves. The obligation to be visible, to maintain a continuous self-image, leads to a kind of delegitimization or even prohibition of invisibility, and the injunction to continuous visibility in contemporary societies reveals an essential aspect of the new condition of modern man or woman, a condition that helps to establish an unprecedented psychic economy linked to the unlimited and intrusive nature of technologies. Are we still, as Arendt wrote, thinking beings when frames and containers of thought are called into question? Do not we tend to be overwhelmed to the point of being uprooted in a liquid society that is constantly changing as a result of increasing acceleration? Do we tend to be excluded by technology whose modes of operation we cannot understand? It's precisely this that may have changed with the development and extension of information technologies, now inextricably linked to commodification and the consequent need not only to communicate but constantly, but also to make oneself visible in order to exist. This is calling into question the very status of the invisibility of thought. It is in fact forced to appear, to show itself in the neoliberal forms of the market. Confronted as we are with continuous acceleration and illimitation, and yet needing to stop, to alternate between moving and stopping in order to think. Does this encourage us to habituate through repetition rather than to think with attention? Would we be forced to think differently? And what would this otherwise mean? Thinking supposes the absence of mental and psychic constraint, but with the demands of productivity and utility in contemporary neoliberalism, technical, technological, social, political, and psychological conditions have been profoundly transformed. The nature of our relationship with ourselves has changed. The personality types we encourage, our ways of thinking, behaving, and feeling have all been overturned by contemporary globalization. Let's ask the question again. What do we mean by thinking? Is it possible to think without being a free subject, acceleration, inducing a lack of limits, limitedness and inattention, leading in a way to a new kind of force to emerge, exerted through social networks? We need to distinguish between and even oppose the withdrawal into oneself, at least the ability to withdraw, that is necessary for thinking, and withdrawal into oneself with indifference, egocentricity, and narcissism, a detour of their interest in the outside world, whether people and things, to themselves, their own person, inducing narcissism. Are we now just as confronted with the psychological misery of individual isolation in the face of an intangible, unappeasable force, the force of the market, of neoliberalism, the end of protective state? Technologies bring us closer together, cancelling out distance, paradoxically establishing continuous contact and at the same time abysmal distance. The technical forms of self-extension are not neutral. They give the individual a tenfold increase in power, while at the same time allowing a diffuse psychic insecurity to develop. This technology will contribute to replacing time-based ways of living and experiencing which gave pride of place to exchange and conversation, with called deaf and blind devices, instantaneity, and distancing from the other, leading to indifference to others, erasure, or conversely, fusional adhesion, massification. This insidious but originally circumscribed hostility now appears tenfold on social networks, thanks to instantaneous and unlimited extension, as well as anonymity and group modes of operation, revealing a veritable relentlessness to destroy stems from a genealogy, the spectacle, the rage, the desire for murder. There is a common trait among individuals striving to live and sometimes survive in the bureaucratic neoliberal society that have become ours, their isolation. This raises the question of collective forms of resistance. In conclusion, a fundamental psychic need to preserve an invisible space in which to think without being forced to produce. Moreover, by making psychic life an object of the law in order to escape from pax and sadism. The law would help to resist communitarianism and the confinement of identitarism. Sorry, and thank you very much. I have been long.